A woman in a cheap power suit slammed a fine notice on my doorstep. $100,000 for violations I'd never heard of. Smirking, she had no idea she had just messed with the wrong homeowner. You see, I'm not just another resident. I own half the properties in this neighborhood, including hers. It all started when I moved into what I thought would be a peaceful, upscale neighborhood. I'd spent years building my real estate empire, flipping properties, investing in commercial and residential real estate, and quietly amassing a fortune. My goal was never to be flashy or boast about my success. In fact, I enjoyed living under the radar. I chose this neighborhood precisely because it was supposed to be quiet, elegant, and drama-free. That was my first mistake. The moment I closed on the house, I noticed something off. I had barely parked my car in the driveway when an older woman in a blazer marched up, clipboard in hand. Her expression was stern, as if she were about to reprimand a child for misbehaving. "Excuse me, you're the new homeowner?" she asked, her tone sharp. I nodded. "Yeah, that's me." She pursed her lips, giving me a once-over, like I was some stray animal that had wandered onto her pristine property. "I'm Eleanor Vance, president of the HOA," she announced. "We have rules here. I suggest you read through the handbook thoroughly. You'll find everything you need to know about maintaining compliance." I wasn't worried. I had lived in HOA communities before. Some were fine, others were power-hungry nightmares. I wasn't sure where this one landed yet, but I had a gut feeling it wasn't going to be pleasant. A week passed, and I received my first notice, a warning about my driveway. Apparently, my concrete was too light in shade, violating the neighborhood's uniformity standards. I laughed it off. Surely this was a joke. But then another notice arrived. This time, I was fined $500 for my trash bins being visible from the street. I had barely settled in, and the violations were piling up like an ambush. I decided to do a little digging. Talking to a few neighbors, I quickly learned Eleanor was a tyrant. She ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom, imposing ridiculous fines on residents for minor infractions. Several homeowners had been forced to pay thousands in bogus penalties, some even losing their homes due to foreclosure when they couldn't keep up. She'd been doing this for years. One elderly neighbor whispered to me. I wanted to sell my house, but she blocked my listing, saying I hadn't pre-approved the color of my shutters with the HOA. I had to pay thousands just to be allowed to sell my own property. The more I heard, the more disgusted I became. It was clear Eleanor wasn't just a busybody enforcing rules. She was running a full-blown extortion racket. Then the bombshell dropped. A thick envelope arrived in my mailbox marked urgent. Inside was an official-looking document from the HOA outlining a series of infractions I had supposedly committed. The total fine, $100,000. I blinked. That had to be a mistake. I flipped through the pages, scanning the list. My grass was too green. My windows reflected too much sunlight. My mailbox was not to code. It was absurd. It was robbery. I stormed over to the HOA office, located inside the neighborhood clubhouse. Eleanor sat behind a desk, lazily flipping through a magazine. When she saw me, she smirked. "Ah, Mr. Hayes," she said, feigning politeness. "I assume you're here about your violations?" I dropped the papers on her desk. "You think I'm going to pay this nonsense?" She raised an eyebrow. "If you don't, we'll place a lien on your home. You wouldn't be the first." I narrowed my eyes. "You're seriously trying to extort me for 100 grand? Eleanor leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "It's not extortion. It's the rules. If you don't like it, you're free to move." I smiled. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" She scoffed. "I don't care who you are. The HOA has full authority here." I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I simply turned around and walked out. She thought she had one. She thought she had another victim trapped in her web. She had no idea she had just declared war on the wrong man. Because what Eleanor didn't know, what no one in the neighborhood knew, was that I wasn't just some random homeowner. I was a billionaire real estate mogul. And while she thought she was holding all the cards, I was about to flip the entire deck on her. I didn't react immediately. Eleanor expected me to fight her right then and there, to beg or argue, to cower under her so-called authority. But I had played bigger games than this. I wasn't just going to beat her. I was going to dismantle her entire empire. I started with the basics. If an HOA is corrupt, there's always a paper trail. These scams don't run on Eleanor's intimidation alone. They need fraudulent finances, hidden accounts, and a network of complicit board members. The first step was talking to the neighbors. I took a casual approach, knocking on doors and striking up conversations. Most residents were cautious at first. Eleanor had created a culture of fear. But once I made it clear that I wasn't just another homeowner, but someone willing to fight, The stories started pouring in. I paid almost $15,000 in fines last year, an elderly man named Mr. Dawson said, and I never saw a single improvement in the neighborhood, just more rules. She controls everything, a younger couple added. She rejected our fence 3 times, saying the wood was too rustic. Then she approved the exact same fence for her friend down the street. One woman even whispered, people who fight back end up with surprise violations, and if you refuse to pay, foreclosure. She takes their homes. That caught my attention. I needed proof. Luckily, I had an ace up my sleeve. While Eleanor saw me as just another clueless homeowner, I had extensive real estate connections, including access to property records, financial filings, and legal experts who could help me trace HOA money flow. Within 48 hours, I had a detailed report in my hands. And what I found was beyond anything I expected. The HOA was a full-blown extortion scheme. Eleanor and her board had been funneling fines into private accounts under the guise of community improvements. They claimed money was going to landscaping, clubhouse renovations, and security enhancements, but none of those services actually existed. In fact, most of the neighborhood's so-called projects had been paid for on paper only. The money never left bank accounts the HOA controlled. And the foreclosures? Even worse. Eleanor had personally acquired 4 properties in the last 2 years, houses she had forced into foreclosure with excessive fines. Then, like clockwork, those houses were mysteriously sold at below market value to LLCs owned by her relatives and friends. I had enough evidence to ruin her. But I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to take everything from her, turning the tables. First, I made some strategic property moves. Using shell companies, I quietly started buying properties in the neighborhood from residents desperate to escape Eleanor's tyranny. By the end of the week, I had acquired over 40% of the homes in the HOA. Second, I dug deeper into the HOA board. Most of them were nothing more than Eleanor's lapdogs, but a couple of them were weak links. People who weren't as involved in the corruption but had gone along with it out of fear or financial benefit. I approached one of them, Ted, the HOA treasurer. He was a nervous wreck when I met him at a local cafe. I didn't know how deep it went, he stammered when I confronted him with the financial discrepancies. I knew Eleanor was aggressive, but I didn't realize she was actually stealing. She's about to go down, I told him. The only question is whether you go down with her. Ted swallowed hard. Then, in a shaky voice, he muttered, "What do you need me to do?" Perfect. With Ted flipping and my property acquisitions growing, I was no longer just a resident fighting an HOA. I was an owner with power. I knew Eleanor wouldn't see it coming, so I let her think she was still in control. That's when I got another violation notice, this time for $25,000. Apparently, my front door was the wrong shade of beige. I smirked as I read the letter. Eleanor thought she was playing a game. She had no idea she was about to lose everything. The moment I received the new violation notice, I knew Eleanor was doubling down. She wasn't just coming after me. She was trying to break me. But I wasn't some clueless homeowner she could bully into submission. I was about to hit back hard. Instead of reacting immediately, I let her think she was still in control. I went about my days like normal, giving no indication that I was setting up her downfall. While she smirked behind her HOA desk, dreaming of my inevitable surrender, I was making moves behind the scenes. A few days later, Eleanor decided to confront me in person. She strutted up my driveway, smug as ever, and handed me another thick envelope. "You're officially in violation of multiple HOA rules," she said, barely containing her glee. "If you don't pay the fines within 30 days, we'll be forced to place a lien on your home. And if you don't resolve the issues after that, well," she gave a fake sympathetic shrug, "foreclosure is always an option." I raised an eyebrow. "Foreclosure? Over a front door?" "It's not just the door," she snapped. "It's your landscaping, your mailbox, your window treatments. Everything." I folded my arms and gave her a long look. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" She scoffed. "I don't care who you are. The HOA has full authority here. You signed the contract when you moved in." I smiled. "Good to know." Then I handed her a thick envelope of my own. She took it, confused, and opened it. Her face turned ghost white as she scanned the document. This is an eviction notice?" she stammered. I nodded. "That's right. You've been living here rent-free for years, acquiring foreclosed homes through HOA corruption. The thing is, you don't actually own your house anymore." She looked up, panic creeping into her eyes. "I do," I said casually. Eleanor didn't believe me at first, but she quickly realized I was dead serious. I had been buying properties in the neighborhood for weeks, acquiring just enough to hold majority voting power in the HOA. I wasn't just some resident fighting against the board. I owned the board, and I was about to use that power against her. I called for an emergency HOA meeting, something only a majority property owner could do. Eleanor arrived with her usual confidence, flanked by the other corrupt board members, expecting to shut me down. She even had a smirk on her face when she sat down at the head of the table. But the moment I opened my folder and began laying out her crimes, that smirk vanished. I started with the financial discrepancies. According to HOA records, I said, residents have been paying thousands in fines every year, yet there's no actual record of where the money has gone. I pulled out bank statements showing transfers into personal accounts linked to Eleanor and her board members. You've been stealing from the community, I continued, sliding the evidence toward the other board members. A few of them gulped. Eleanor's face went red. This is nonsense, she spat. You're not a lawyer. You don't have the authority to look at HOA finances. I leaned back. Oh, but I do. Because I own 40% of the properties in this neighborhood. The room went dead silent. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You're lying, she finally muttered. I smiled. Would you like to see the purchase records? I slid another folder across the table. Eleanor snatched it up, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. Every home I had acquired, every title transfer, was listed. She wasn't dealing with a desperate homeowner anymore. She was dealing with a real estate mogul who had just legally taken control of her entire domain. At this point, the other board members started turning on her. Ted, the HOA treasurer I had flipped earlier, cleared his throat. I didn't know about the money laundering, he said nervously. Eleanor shot him a death glare. Shut up, Ted. But Ted was done covering for her. If this is true, we could be in serious legal trouble. That's when I dropped the second bombshell. I pulled out my phone, pressed play, and a recording of Ted's confession filled the room. Eleanor's been running this place like a dictatorship, Ted's voice said. She finds people into foreclosure, then her friends buy the houses cheap. It's a scam, man. I didn't know how deep it went, but she controls everything. Eleanor lunged across the table, trying to grab my phone. You can't record that. That's illegal, she shrieked. I yanked my hand back before she could touch me. Actually, in this state, it's perfectly legal to record a conversation as long as one party consents. And, well, I consented. She turned to the rest of the board. Are you all just going to sit there? Do something? But they were done. The HO vice president, a quiet man who had clearly been waiting for an opportunity to escape her grip, spoke up. I vote to remove Eleanor as HOA president. The vote was unanimous. Eleanor screeched in outrage. You can't do this. I built this HOA. You can't. I cut her off. Eleanor, it's over. She turned to me, pure hatred in her eyes. You think this is over? She hissed. You have no idea who you're messing with. I smirked. Neither did you. I turned to the board. Now, let's talk about dissolving this HOA. And just like that, Eleanor's reign of terror was over. Eleanor wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She had spent years ruling the HOA like her personal kingdom, and she wasn't going to let some nobody, as she still deluded herself into believing I was, take everything from her without a counterattack. The moment she was removed as HOA president, I expected retaliation. What I didn't expect was just how dirty she was willing to play. The very next morning, I woke up to find a fresh HOA violation notice taped to my door. Apparently, I had broken 7 new rules overnight. My house disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. My car was an improper model for the community. My hedges were 1.5 inches too tall. And my mailbox was positioned at an incorrect angle. Each of these violations came with a hefty fine. Total amount, $75,000. I laughed. This was Eleanor's way of trying to weaponize the HOA against me one last time. Eleanor wasn't just slapping me with bogus fines. She was actively trying to rebuild her empire. She started meeting with a handful of staunch HOA loyalists, convincing them that the board meeting was invalid and that she was still the rightful HOA president. Word spread that she was forming an unofficial HOA committee. They began patrolling the neighborhood, issuing fake violation notices and intimidating residents. Some of them even tried blocking my driveway with their cars, claiming I was trespassing in my own home. The intimidation tactics didn't stop there. When the fines and scare tactics didn't work, Eleanor took her next desperate step. She filed a lawsuit against me. She claimed I had illegally acquired properties through deception, coerced the HOA board into voting against her, and violated contractual obligations as a homeowner. Her goal was to drag me into a legal battle and drain me financially. She even started spreading rumors that I was a scammer, hoping to turn the neighborhood against me. What she didn't realize was who she was actually dealing with. Eleanor made a huge mistake by going public with her lies. She tried painting herself as a victim of a hostile corporate takeover. She gave an interview to a local news station, sobbing about how I had stolen the neighborhood from her and how she was just trying to protect the community. That was the opening I needed. I made a few calls. Within 48 hours, every major news outlet had the real story. The headlines read, HOA president accused of extortion and fraud. Corrupt HOA scheme exposed. Homeowners fined into foreclosure. Real estate investor uncovers HOA scam. And ex-board president under investigation. When the story broke, Eleanor panicked. She tried denying everything. But with all the financial documents, witness statements, and legal records I had compiled, she had no defense. Even residents who had once been terrified of her started coming forward, sharing their horror stories. Eleanor had lost control of the narrative. Seeing the writing on the wall, Eleanor's former board members started turning against her. Ted, the treasurer, publicly confessed to how Eleanor had manipulated HOA funds. 2 other board members admitted to signing off on illegal foreclosures under her orders. Residents testified that she had threatened them with legal action if they spoke out. At this point, even the local authorities were taking an interest. Eleanor's past financial dealings were being investigated for fraud, embezzlement, and even racketeering. She had gone from queen of the HOA to a disgraced scam artist under legal scrutiny, but she still wasn't done. When Eleanor realized she was running out of options, she tried to come after me personally. Late one night, someone slashed the tires on my car. A few days later, my security cameras caught a couple of her HOA loyalists throwing garbage on my lawn. Then a false complaint was filed against me with the city, claiming I was running an illegal business out of my home. It was a desperate attempt to intimidate me, but I had one final card left to play. I called another emergency board meeting, this time with the entire neighborhood invited. With the majority of homeowners on my side, and with Eleanor effectively stripped of power, I made my final move. I'm proposing a vote to dissolve the HOA. The crowd erupted in applause. One by one, the residents voted yes. Eleanor's biggest weapon, the HOA, was completely dismantled. No more fines. No more ridiculous rules. No more Eleanor. With that vote, Eleanor officially lost everything, nothing, and she knew it. As I left the meeting, she sat in the back of the room, shaking with rage, realizing her reign of terror was truly over. But the best part? I wasn't done with her yet. Eleanor had lost everything. The HOA was officially dissolved, her influence shattered, and her reputation dragged through the mud. But I wasn't done with her yet. She had spent years terrorizing homeowners, stealing from them, and forcing people out of their own homes. I wasn't about to let her walk away without facing real consequences. The moment the vote to dissolve the HOA passed, I saw it in her eyes, pure panic. She sat frozen in the back of the room, gripping the edge of her chair as reality crashed down on her. No more HOA meant no more control, no more fines, no more foreclosure scams, and worst of all, no more easy money. The next day, Eleanor made a pathetic attempt to claw her way back. She went door to door, begging people to reconsider the HOA decision, trying to convince them that I had tricked them into giving up valuable community protections. The problem? Nobody believed her anymore. The residents she had bullied for years laughed in her face. One homeowner, a retired Navy veteran named Mr. Dawson, didn't even let her finish her speech. "You're the reason I almost lost my house," he growled, slamming the door in her face. Another neighbor, a single mother Eleanor had fined over $10,000 for unauthorized seasonal decorations, looked her dead in the eyes and said, "I hope you lose everything." Eleanor's desperation was palpable. With the HOA gone, she had no steady income. Her scam was over. And that's when I decided to finish what I started. Eleanor's downfall wasn't just about losing power. She had broken real laws, and I was going to make sure she faced the consequences. First, I filed a lawsuit against her personally. The money she stole? I had receipts. The fraudulent foreclosures? Exposed. The bogus fines? Documented. Second, I handed over all my evidence to the district attorney. Eleanor had embezzled HOA funds for years. She had committed fraud by falsifying financial records. She had used her position to personally benefit from foreclosures. The moment the criminal charges were filed, she completely unraveled. Within a month, Eleanor was hit with multiple lawsuits. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her house, one of the properties she had stolen, was seized by the state. And worst of all, she was arrested. The day it happened, I made sure to be there. I stood on my front porch, watching as 2 police officers escorted her out of her home in handcuffs. The once powerful HOA dictator was now a disgraced criminal. She saw me standing there, and for a brief moment, her face twisted with rage. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You ruined everything." I just smiled. "No, Eleanor. You did that all by yourself." She was thrown into the back of the police car, her face plastered all over the news that night. Eleanor Vance, former HOA president, arrested for fraud and embezzlement. It was poetic justice. With Eleanor gone, the neighborhood transformed overnight. The ridiculous fines were erased. Homeowners who had been wrongfully fined got their money back. The properties she stole were returned to their rightful owners. And as for the HOA, it never came back. Instead, I worked with the community to create a new system, one that actually benefited homeowners instead of exploiting them. No pointless rules, no abuse of power, no Eleanor, just neighbors living their lives in peace. Months later, I got one last piece of news about Eleanor. After being convicted of fraud, she was ordered to pay back every stolen dollar. Since she had no assets left, she was forced to file for bankruptcy. Her name was ruined. No one wanted to work with her. No one wanted to rent to her. No one wanted anything to do with her. The woman who had once ruled the neighborhood like a queen was now broke, disgraced, and powerless. I heard she ended up renting a tiny apartment in a rundown part of town. No gated community, no HOA power, no money, just a bitter, washed-up fraud who had finally gotten what she deserved. And I stayed in the neighborhood, enjoying my peaceful life, free of the HOA. Every time I walked past Eleanor's house, now abandoned, I couldn't help but smile because, in the end, the tyrant always falls. Eleanor was gone. The HOA was dead. The neighborhood was finally free. But my work wasn't done yet. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to make sure something like this never happened again. I had already dismantled Eleanor's empire, exposed her fraud, and made sure she faced real consequences. Now it was time for the final reveal. The day after Eleanor's sentencing, a moving truck pulled up in front of her old house. It wasn't for her. She had been forced to sell everything to cover her legal fees. She was officially homeless. I happened to be outside when she showed up, a broken shell of the tyrant she once was. Her eyes, once filled with smug arrogance, were now hollow and defeated. She didn't say anything as she watched strangers move into what was once her kingdom. She just stood there, gripping a cheap suitcase, staring at the place she once controlled with an iron fist. Then, finally, she turned to me. "You took everything from me," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. I met her gaze, completely calm. "No, Eleanor, you did that to yourself." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She knew I was right. Without another word, she walked away, disappearing down the street, a nobody in a world where she once thought she was untouchable. As I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over my now peaceful neighborhood, free of the HOA, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. One woman, hungry for power, had tried to rule people through fear. She thought she could bully, extort, and scam her way to the top, but in the end, she lost everything. Because when you push people too far, when you abuse your power for too long, eventually karma catches up. And I made sure Eleanor got exactly what she deserved. What do you think? Should HOAs have this much power? Have you ever dealt with an HOA president like Eleanor? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insane real estate battles.